The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to the Civic Engagement webinar for the Fire Island National Seashore Off-Road Vehicle Management Project. My name is Doug Wetmore, and I'm the project manager. Katie Jackson, park planner at Fire Island National Seashore, will now offer some welcoming remarks and get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Especially thank you to those who attended last time and are here for a second round. The purpose of today's webinar is to share with you information about the Off-Road Vehicle Driving Program, or ORV program, at Fire Island National Seashore, and some of the ideas that we've been thinking about to make the driving program better and more efficient for everyone. One of those ideas is to change Fire Island's driving regulation. This regulation provides sideboards on how we are to manage driving at Fire Island, and changing the regulation is a process we want your input on. This is not the only time you'll be hearing from us about the ORV driving regulation, and you will have many more opportunities to provide your ideas and comments to us. So today, this is an agenda of what we're going to be talking about. Next, please. I want to introduce our staff. At the end of this presentation, there will be a question and answer opportunity, and we have some staff on the phone that will be providing some of the answers. So we are all separate, so if there's a little bit of lag, we apologize, but we're all operating virtually and from afar from each other. So Alex Romero, our superintendent at Fire Island National Seashore, unfortunately can't be with us today. I'm Caitlin Jackson, I'm the park planner. Jason Pristipa is our chief of administration. He's here and he administers the driving program. Sonia Tayani is the management analyst and deals with everyone related to the permitting process. John Swindle couldn't be with us, but Claire Formansky is here and she's part of the West District Ranger cohort. Bernie Felix may be on, but we're not, may be on a little bit later. And then Doug Wetmore is our project manager from the Environmental Quality Division of the National Park Service. Next, please. Fire Island National Seashore was established in 1964 for the purpose of conserving and preserving for future generations the relatively unspoiled and undeveloped beaches, dunes, and other natural features in close proximity to high concentrations of population, including New York City and Long Island. The enabling legislation for Fire Island National Seashore is the law that dictates what the park can and cannot do, and declares why the park is established by Congress. When national parks are established, each of their legislation describes the resources that are to be protected for the public and for future generations. Another important part about Fire Island's story is the grassroots efforts by the Fire Island communities to establish the park and to stop Robert Moses from expanding the Ocean Parkway the length of Fire Island. I'm going to pass this back to Doug for some logistics about our webinar.
Thank you, Katie. As an attendee today, you'll be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions about the information presented today, please type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type in your question at any time during the webinar, and we will respond to it during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Although we're happy to share this information with you today and answer your questions on the off-road vehicle management at Fire Island, questions submitted today as part of the webinar are not considered formal comments on the project. If you would like to submit formal comments, you will be able to do so by the National Park Service's Planning, Environment, and Public Comment website, also known as PEPC. The PEPC link is on this slide and can also be found in your chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel. To submit comments on the project, just follow the link and click Open for Comment. The deadline to submit your comments is October 2nd, 2020, and we will provide further details about how to provide meaningful comments later in this presentation. As Katie mentioned, this is not the only time you'll have the opportunity to provide comments related to the Fire Island driving program. There will continue to be opportunities to comment, especially as the park transitions into a formal NEPA process in the near future. Right now, we're going to ask you to participate in a very small poll and so you can let us know how you heard about this webinar today. Just a few more seconds here. Okay, Susie. Okay, it looks like most people heard about it from Constant Contact, from the park, or Year-Round Residents Association, which is really good. So it looks like people are hearing about this electronically, and that's good to hear that we are reaching who we need to reach today. We'll talk a little bit about the process. The pre-NEPA process allows the Seashore to explore issues associated with the off-road vehicle program and identify possible solutions, and then determine if change is needed, and if so, what level of NEPA compliance is necessary. The goals of pre-NEPA process are listed on this slide, and at this time we are in the civic engagement portion of the process. The pre-NEPA process will most likely conclude by the end of 2020. And when we say NEPA, just to make sure everybody knows, it's defined at the bottom of this slide. It's the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires federal agencies like the National Park Service to analyze environmental impacts of actions and engage the public in the decision-making process. Now I'd like to hand it over back to Katie to discuss the history and details of the off-road vehicle program at Fire Island.
Thanks, Doug. So earlier I mentioned the enabling legislation. The enabling legislation that established the park recognized the value and need for protection of the environment of Fire Island, and the general management plan identifies how the park is going to protect those resources for the next 15 to 20 years, and it's a roadmap for us to manage the park. The general management plan was finalized in 2016 and is a great example of collaboration between the 7 layers of jurisdiction on Fire Island in envisioning and managing Fire Island into the future. The GMP builds on the enabling legislation and recognizes the importance of the communities and their roles as stewards in the protection of Fire Island. And it speaks to the roadless character of Fire Island, the result of that grassroots effort by community members and stakeholders. In the general management plan, it states that we are to preserve the roadless character of Fire Island and ensure water-based transportation is the primary form of access to Fire Island whenever and wherever feasible. We are to continue collaboration with others to support a roadless environment on Fire Island where driving is kept to a minimum, continue regulation of vehicle access on Fire Island, and collaborate with others to ensure that water-based transportation remains the primary form of access to Fire Island. The GMP reflects the requirements of our enabling legislation, and it's a good guide for this process as we review the current regulation and consider potential changes. Next, please. I wanted to orient ourselves to Fire Island National Seashore. Fire Island itself is 32 miles long, and of that, 26 miles is the National Seashore, and it's outlined in the dark, bold green outline that goes into the Great South Bay, around to the right-hand side through Moriches Inlet, and in front of the ocean. Within the National Seashore, the green tracts of land, like light green tracts of land, are federal Park Service land. The white tracts of land on Fire Island are privately held in holdings, including the 17 private communities, or 17 communities, and town and village-owned properties. Towards the east to the right, there is a light green and white striped piece of land. That's the Otis Pike Fire Island High Dune Wilderness Area. It is the only federally designated wilderness in New York State and is one of the smallest wilderness areas the National Park Service manages. And further to the right, to the east, you could see Smith Point County Park is within the boundaries of the seashore. And just north of that is in green, and outlined in green, is the William Floyd Estate in Mastic on the mainland of Long Island. This map shows in blue lines the ferry routes that go from Long Island to Fire Island, and the blue dots indicate where there's ferry terminals in the communities on Fire Island. The green dots indicate ferry terminals on Park Service lands, including Watch Hill and Sailor's Haven. So we have a variety of uses on Fire Island. We have the lighthouse for Park Service lands. We have the lighthouse Sailor's Haven with our oldest maritime holly forest there. It's globally rare. Our wilderness area and the William Floyd Estate are pretty significant. And then we have the varying characters on Fire Island within the communities. There are 7 layers of jurisdiction occurring and managing Fire Island within the boundaries. That means there's at least 7 competing interests and missions that often do not align and further require everyone within the boundaries of the National Seashore to work together to manage our shared resource. It is not common in national parks to have this number of jurisdictions and varying uses operating within a national park. The beauty of our complex mosaic of uses is that there's something for everyone. Between our collection of natural tracts and park lands to the very characters of each community, there is something for everyone, and protecting it needs to be balanced. Next, please. So we want to know what keeps you coming back. What are the resources or the opportunities, recreational opportunities that you like? And you can choose as many from this list as you'd like. Susie, you want to close the, there you go. All right, so the majority of folks on the call today come back for the communities in the Atlantic Beach. But we have a wide cross-section of users, which is great to see. Next, please. We want to give a brief overview of the history of our driving regulation on Fire Island. A special regulation allows for a particular use, and in our case, our ORV driving regulation allows for vehicle access across federal lands, and we manage it through a permitting system. This slide shows how old the regulation is, and it recognizes that there's been many attempts to make this work better for everyone. We are aware there's planning fatigue with this legacy issue, and we're grateful that everyone remains engaged during this new process. Next. Again, a little bit of an overview. The regulation is for driving across National Park Service lands. It was issued in '77 and amended in '87, and it's stayed the same since then. So the regulation was created in a time where our conditions were different. So our conditions have changed on Fire Island. Development has increased quite a bit since the park was established, which was not anticipated. It also has increased the need for access and the need for utilities and construction and businesses and all that goes along with that. So the regulation is a bit outdated for our needs today, and that's why, again, we're going through this process. For regulations within the National Park Service, whenever we have a special regulation, we tie it back to the natural and cultural resources that the park was established. So again, that enabling legislation, the law that created the park, we have to go, whenever we do a special regulation to allow a special use, it has to be in line with the protection of the resources. And that includes the visitor experience. But then we have to balance maintaining access for privately owned properties within the seashore. Next, please. These are the elements of the regulation that govern how the permit system works, and are also elements that are being reviewed to determine if changes would improve the process. So currently, these are the things that are in our driving regulation, the major provisions that give us the sideboards of what we can and cannot do through this regulation. It identifies who can apply for a permit, the types of permits and categories. It sets limits for each category. It describes the recreational driving on the east end, identifies vehicle restrictions, indicates where vehicles can operate on National Park Service lands, defines when vehicles can operate both seasonally and times of day, and it establishes the process for obtaining a driving permit. Next, please. So switching gears a little bit, we wanted to review our town hall meeting results that we had from last year. We took advantage of Alex's first summer on Fire Island and went out to the communities to hear concerns and issues from the folks out there related to driving. And thank you if you had been a part of that. They were really great meetings to have. We focused on driving. We had 4 different meetings. 3 were before Labor Day weekend and 1 was after Labor Day weekend. The 4th one after Labor Day was focused for the year-round residents. We had a good cross-section of folks that came, but we understand that this is a snapshot in time. The data that we collected is specific to the individuals that attended, and we had 253 people in attendance throughout the 4 in total. And we asked folks how they self-identified their relationship with Fire Island. So there are 6 different categories: year-round residents, seasonal residents, contractors, business owners, employees, and renters. And that gave us an understanding of who we were talking to, and it gave us an understanding of where they were coming from when we got responses from them. Next, please. So that was really important and great information to have to understand who we were talking to last year at those town hall meetings. So we'd like to do the same thing today. And please identify, select the best one you think is you and how you self-identify with your relationship on Fire Island. All right, so today we have mostly year-round residents. We have some seasonal residents, day-week beach visitors, and essential services. So this, for the second time we're doing this, we have missed the recreational driving permit holders, which is good for us to know. That means we're not doing everything we can to reach that group to engage them about driving. Next, please. I want to review the results from last year's town hall meetings. We had 2 ways of receiving input and answers from the folks that joined us. So on the upper image, where the dots are, each of those 6 categories received a colored dot that it was associated with the category. So we kind of knew what answers were associated with which groups of people. We also had people write in on sticky notes their responses to some questions. We asked people, what are the challenges of living on Fire Island? And the biggest concerns we heard were driving restrictions and an inadequate ferry schedule. We asked, what are the issues associated with driving activities? And the biggest concerns were inadequate ferry schedule, driving restrictions, and too many vehicles and bikes. Next, please. We asked people, do you think there's too much beach driving in the summer? And we received 393 dots, and most indicated they thought there was too much beach driving in the summer. We asked, how do you access Fire Island? And for the first 3 meetings we had previous to Labor Day weekend, most people indicated they used the ferry to get to Fire Island, and the second was by driving by permit. And the 4th meeting that we had after Labor Day that was focused for the year-round residents. Driving by permit was the most popular way they accessed Fire Island, and ferry access was the second. Next, please. Oh, wait, not quite. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Next, please. So we took the issues that we heard at the town hall meetings and went through them and kind of separated them into two groups. One was issues that can be addressed potentially through a driving regulation change. So these are the things we heard at the town halls, and these are the things that solutions can potentially be through the regulation change. And that includes driving on beaches and on internal roads on National Park Service lands, issues related to driving behavior on National Park Service lands, limiting the total number of permits and the number of permits per household, seasonal and time of day restrictions, changing permits from full-time to part-time, and reducing permits for those other than residents. So these are the issues that we heard from the public that can be changed with this regulation. These are the issues that ended up going into another category, which are issues that are real but that solutions would not be through a regulation change. So this doesn't mean that they're real issues. They're things that we hear over and over again, but solutions can be found elsewhere by working together to come up with solutions. A regulation change for this process would not be able to address these issues. So that includes increasing NPS communications, providing a more transparent permitting system, driving on beaches within communities, driving internal roads within communities, crowding, behavior of residents or visitors in the communities, amending the ferry schedules, and providing a shuttle service. So back to that regulation, the regulation focuses on impacts to our resources and access on National Park Service lands. And it doesn't give us full ability to regulate what happens within the private holdings and communities, but those are issues that we can work together to figure out. So just like Fire Island's complex jurisdictional challenges, each stakeholder group identifies their own challenges and struggles. We often don't communicate what our internal NPS challenges are with administering the driving program or our concerns related to environmental damages as a result of the program. And this is part of why we wanted to host these webinars, to share this information with you and from our point of view, what we're being challenged with and struggling with. Over the past year, we're working on identifying the National Park Service issues that can be addressed through a driving regulation change. So this time I'd like to hand it back to Doug to discuss some of those issues identified during this pre-NEPA process. And Doug is going to present, what he's going to present next are the NPS issues that our internal working group came up with.
Thank you, Katie. The following slides that I'm going to present include a series of issues associated with the current driving regulation that the planning team has identified during pre-NEPA. We are seeking your ideas to help resolve these issues or to better frame the issue if you see it differently. The first issue identified was permit processing. According to the current ORV regulation, driving permits are required by the towns of Islip and Brookhaven and by the National Park Service. Each of these entities has different requirements and processes for issuing driving permits. The Seashore would like to work with the towns to simplify the permit process if possible. What are your ideas for simplifying this process? And just as a reminder, you can type in questions during the webinar, but we want to encourage you also to submit a formal comment through the NPS Pepsi website. So the current driving regulation identifies 7 different permit categories that were created a long time ago, making the permit program complicated for permit holders and Fire Island staff. The existing permit categories, as seen on the screen, do they make sense for the current uses on Fire Island? And would changing them improve the permitting process for drivers and Seashore staff? The next issue that the team identified was permit caps. So the current regulation at Fire Island limits the number of permits per category that the NPS can issue. The caps just like the categories, were based on data from the early 1980s and are displayed on this slide. As you can see, there are the existing categories and the caps or limits on number of permits that the Fire Island can issue. While the number of permits can be useful in managing the driving program on Fire Island, it can also result in a level of complexity that might create confusion for Seashore staff, permit holders, and the general public. And our question to the public is, are these caps a useful tool for managing driving, protecting resources, or should they be reconsidered? This slide is also about permit caps. It just gives you some potential ideas that we had come up with as a team to try to think about permit caps as a tool for managing the program. There's an option for no caps and trip-based caps, and adjusting the caps for recreational driving on the east end of Fire Island, and then adjusting caps based on any impacts to natural resources that we've discovered through any resource studies. These are just some of the issues we've come up with, and we're reaching out to you to help us come up with additional ones. There's also an issue considering vehicle characteristics. And what this means is that the driving regulation currently requires vehicles to be four-wheel drive and under 10,000 pounds. And through the years, transportation technology has changed since these vehicles' restrictions were created. Is this part of the regulation too restrictive? Should Fire Island allow heavier vehicles and all-wheel drive vehicles? And should vehicles like ATV be allowed on Fire Island beaches? And if so, where? And maybe there should be a clearance requirement for operating on beaches. And so there are many different ways that this can change under a revised regulation. So we're reaching out to the users of Fire Island to see if you can help us out with this. As many of you know, the current regulation includes seasonal and time of day restrictions, as noted on the slide. The restrictions are in place primarily to protect sensitive species and reduce impacts to visitor experience. These seasonal restrictions are also further broken down in the Superintendent's Compendium by category. The Superintendent's Compendium is a summary of park-specific rules that are implemented under the Code of Federal Regulations. And so here we see the residential permit chart from the Superintendent's Compendium. It provides much more detail on what the dates, times, and seasons are for year-round residents. And then this slide here gives you an idea of what the compendium currently looks like for driving dates and times for contractor and essential services personnel, permit holders. Should these seasonal and time of day restrictions be maintained or modified to be less complex? Fire Island is a dynamic barrier island environment where driving conditions can change frequently. For example, in the winter, the beach can become much narrower and much more difficult to drive on. In 2012, a breach formed in the wilderness area during Hurricane Sandy, creating an additional complication that affects how the park allows vehicular access and recreation. The current regulation does not provide flexibility in managing driving in such a dynamic environment. This is an issue that the park would like to address in a new driving regulation. That last slide is related to this slide, which is recreational driving permits. I know we didn't have a lot of folks on the line who selected that they used that end of the island for driving, but it is available, and the current regulation allows it for visitors who are hunting or fishing. Recreational driving is limited to the beach in front of the wilderness on the eastern end of the seashore. The recreational driving area was 6 miles long, but it is now 1.5 miles long due to the 2012 breach that we saw on the last slide. However, the Park Service still issues the same number of recreational driving permits and access trips, 5,000 trips per year, which means the same amount of use is occurring in a much smaller area. increased visitor and vehicle density could lead to an increased conflicts and reduced visitor enjoyment of this area. Through this project, we have an opportunity right now to redefine the recreational experience in front of the entire wilderness area. So we'll have a poll about the wilderness area, and we ask you now to tell us how you think the area in front of the wilderness should be used. Okay, Susie, you can share the results. So it looks like it's almost equally split between continue the recreational driving for hunting and fishing, and also residential access, which is what used to be the use of the area before the breach filled in. And then quite a good percentage also said that no vehicles should be in front of wilderness. So what we'd like to have you do with this information is, while the polls are important on gauging who's on the call today and what the people attending today think about these areas, going to the Pepsi site and providing a comment on why you think uses should continue or be discontinued in certain areas is extremely important for us to understand the pulse of the public and the users of Fire Island. So thank you, and hope you can visit the Pepsi site and do that. Susie, you can go ahead and thank you very much. So another issue that we identified was Burma Road. Because of the change to vehicular access due to the wilderness breach, the park has been seeing increased damage on Burma Road at Sailor's Haven and Sunken Forest, where vehicle access was once very limited. This is a concern to the Park Service and ties back to Fire Island's mission to protect park resources. The driving regulation could be revised to better protect resources from vehicle damage. So this is the last slide on the issues that we identified and we'll be presenting on the webinar. And we, as I said before, encourage you to consider these issues and provide comments and suggestions on how these issues can be addressed through a change in the driving regulation. This provides you with just a little bit of idea of what's next in the process. We're in the pre-NEPA process, which will culminate in a report that provides recommendations for how the park should proceed towards the goal of amending the current driving regulation. The park will then spend some time gathering data to support the planning process. And then we would anticipate that the park would then begin the NEPA process, which would be an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. Then the NPS would amend the driving regulation as informed by the NEPA process. The public will have several more opportunities to provide comment during the NEPA and rulemaking process. Again, we share with you how to provide comments during this pre-NEPA process and this civic engagement process that we're in. Is to follow the link to the NPS Pepsi site and answer the questions and enter any general comments that you may have. Please limit your comments to Fire Island's driving regulation and provide suggestions on how it could be improved. And we do ask that comments be received by October 2nd. And that we're not taking a vote here. We're even though the polls had voting, what we're looking for on Pepsi is your ideas of how the driving program can be changed to be better for residents, for wildlife, and for other users of Fire Island National Seashore. So this is the time to help us get some of those issues addressed in the next form of the regulation. So I will turn it over to Susie to moderate our Q&A session and continue to ask questions through the questions box as we are in this session. And we have about 25 minutes remaining, and we will stay on the line. And until then, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. So as Doug mentioned, we are going to go ahead and move to your questions, and the format, the box on your screen will remain open for you to add questions. So if you think of something, please add it. But with that, we'll dive into the questions. The first question is for Katie, and they're asking, what is constant contact from the park?
Constant Contact is an email program where we populate lists of contacts, and usually specific to different user groups. So if we do have information to share, we'll pick which user group is most appropriate. It is a great tool for the park to use. The downside is it does take quite a bit of maintenance to make sure we have the right folks and the right contacts and updated contacts for each individual. If you are interested, if you don't think your name is on that constant contact somewhere, you want to send us an email, and maybe we could figure out how to do that, but send us some kind of correspondence with your name and your email address and what kind of information you want to receive from the park. We can add you to that constant contact email list.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Sonia. It says the Fire Island National Seashore definition of year-round resident is unclear because there's no explanation in the current driving regulations about what is meant by brief and occasional absences. The town of Islip addressed this issue by adopting a clear and measurable definition of brief and occasional absences, making its administration for vehicle driving permits more transparent. With this in mind, will the Seashore consider adopting the same definition for brief and occasional absences?
So this is something we've been discussing internally, and we don't have an answer yet. But what you can do is go to the Pepsi website and add that to the website, because it's definitely an important issue, and it has given us a lot of problems in the past. So I would just say add it to the Pepsi website.
Thank you. Claire, this next question is for you. Can the West District Rangers monitor the beach tides and post a closure sign at checkpoint during extreme high tides?
So as most permit holders know, they get a tide table with their permit every year. So there's a little bit of ownership to know when the tides are high. That being said, we do the best to try and do that already, but we have a lot of beach that we're responsible for here, and it's not always a blanket open or closed kind of a thing. So it's kind of if you get to a point where you feel unsafe, just turn around and head back. But if you drive out the Kismet Cut and you can't go any farther than Kismet or Saltair, just turn around. It's something that's hard for us to do, but we do try.
Thank you, appreciate it. Katie, this next question is for you. Do all 7 jurisdictions have to agree unanimously to effect a change?
So very complicated. So each jurisdiction has its own mission, and I think the most environmentally sensitive mission is the Park Service's mission. The jurisdictions are operating within our boundaries, so we should align ourselves more so with the Park Service mission, but there is always conflict between. I think we have to get out of the mindset of honestly, we have to get out of the mindset of looking at different properties under different ownership, but that's what our regulation tells us to do. But we do have to work together to understand what we're affecting, how we're affecting our neighbors. And there's a lot of other examples besides driving that gets to that need to collaborate more and understand how development or an activity on one piece of property can affect everything downstream from it. So we don't always have to agree, but I think that that's not a great mindset for for the management of Fire Island. I think we should be trying to reach consensus and understanding where each of our own sideboards and boundaries, theoretical boundaries, are not meshing well. Understand where we're coming from and try to manage the place together instead of trying to separate the different pieces of ownership out.
Okay, thank you. Claire, this next one is for you. If you're concerned about the fragility of Fire Island, why were there so many unpermitted or expired permits and out-of-state vehicles allowed on Fire Island this past spring?
Not every vehicle requires a sticker permit, such as Verizon or PSEG. And a lot of the out-of-state plates are either Verizon trucks or say a PSEG truck. When the local guys don't have a specific piece of equipment, they may get a New Jersey truck or a Connecticut truck. Also, there is, with the FIMI project going on, all of those dunes that were built in Seaview, Ocean Bay Park, and Point of Woods. A lot of the government contractors, the Army Corps of Engineers, will have out-of-state plates. So it may seem like a lot, but it is actually regulated, and we do know about them. They're just usually assigned to some sort of government entity. As far as expired permits, with COVID coming through, there was a temporary hold placed on the pickup of residential, contractor, and essential service permits, just due to social distancing and things of that nature. However, that has since been lifted and people can come and get their permits. So it was a lot this summer with COVID, and I hate to use that as an excuse, but that was really why that you probably saw so many expired permit stickers.
Great, thank you. Jason, the next question is for you. Can part-time permit holder, can the date, the year for part-time permit holders be changed to accommodate the new old timers so that it frees up regular resident permits for someone else?
Yeah, so I think this is an example of something that should go on the Pepsi comment list. So head to the link there and comment there, because the short answer is we can't change that now. It's part of the regulation, but it's a common concern we've heard.
Thank you. And that actually brings up a good point that I just want to reiterate. When we ask you to put your comments on the Pepsi website, the reason we're doing that, some of these comments are really good, and there are things that the Seashore is either considering or would like to consider as they're thinking about new, we see some new ideas here and some ideas we've been talking about. But we can't just change it. We have to do it through the regulations. So that's why we're asking you to add your public comments to Pepsi so we can consider them as we're going through the process. So the next question, Jason, is also for you. Can some accommodation be made for children living at home at the driving age for off-island school and work?
Yeah, so this one is probably, it depends, but most likely not. If the question is related to a residence that already has a permit assigned to it, then unfortunately the answer is currently no, based on the current regulations. But in some strange case where someone may be a year-round resident but doesn't already have a permit assigned to someone in the home, then that could be possible. But I think it's sort of a case-by-case scenario, and most likely no. But I would also suggest that you comment on the Pepsi site.
Thank you. Katie, the next question is for you. The person says, I believe the speed limit is 8 miles per hour, which is good. There are more and more electric bikes where people speed like they are in a race on the central main road, creating a hazard. Different towns have different jurisdictions, but can we do something about it? Police it or post signs? Thank you.
Yeah, the National Park Service, throughout the National Park Service system, is becoming very familiar with e-bikes. So the National Park Service will allow e-bikes wherever regular bikes are allowed, including on our roads and beaches, but they must adhere to the posted 8 mile per hour rule. So if one of our rangers saw a bike, let's say on Lighthouse Road, and it was speeding, they could get a ticket for that. Within the communities, and I think Claire might be able to tag onto this, but within the communities, if our rangers are there, I think that it's usually Suffolk County or maybe the villages enforcing that. So we're really kind of sticking to our properties, National Park Service properties, unless we're asked by another entity to help enforce something. It's usually 20 miles an hour on the beach and 5 miles an hour around pedestrians. on the beach, but I believe it's 8 miles an hour in the interior. So if it's posted and they're breaking that rule, they can be ticketed.
All right, thank you. Claire, did you have anything to add, or should we keep going?
You summed that up pretty well. Each community has its own little speed limit sign, usually once you enter the community. And yeah, as long as you're below 20 on Burma Road or the beach, there's not much that we can do from an enforcement standpoint.
All right, great. Thank you. Katie, this one is also for you. Why should a year-round resident need to get a town permit? Why can't we just get a Fire Island National Seashore permit?
That's a really great question. That gets to that 7 layers of jurisdiction. It's also part of our current regulation that requires all relevant local permits to have all those relevant local permits before we issue. And this is something that I don't think will be an easy change or fix. It would be wonderful if maybe there is one permit that covers Brookhaven, Islip, and Fire Island at once. I think that's a potential solution to this issue, but the way that our regulation has it right now, it's required for you to get the town. So again, it's like that awkward dance of all the multiple layers of jurisdiction. If you live in Saltaire and you want a Saltaire driving permit, then you're getting 3 different permits to get to Saltaire sometimes. And that's a lot, not just on you, but on us as well. So creative solutions to try to streamline that, and where we get the buy-in and that consensus from all of the jurisdictions is important.
All right, and Katie, this is another question for you. Why is transparency off the table as an issue to be discussed here?
Yeah, the regulation again allows driving access on federal property. It doesn't tell us how we're going. It doesn't direct us or tell us how to communicate with everyone. And communication is a constant challenge with everything we do. That 7 layers of jurisdiction, the complexity of 4,200 plus homes, and everyone trying to get the word out to each other is really challenging. So that's not something that we don't need a regulation to tell us how to communicate. We can figure out how to do it better now. So if you do have a suggestion, you don't have to put it on Pepsi because it's not related to the regulation change, but it is something that we should be working together. So maybe perhaps working with FIA and your community leaders, if you have suggestions on how to increase communications, like that constant contact. So if you're not on that contact list, you can email us your information, and we'll try to get you on the list that you're most interested in.
All right, Claire, this next question is for you. This past summer saw many contractor and business owner trucks going on and off the beach at the vehicle overpass and driving on the beach during morning and afternoon hours during the heart of the beach season, June, July, and August. This is disturbing to residents and vacationers. Is this allowed under the current permits, or is it a violation? If it is a violation, who enforces the rules?
So that's a great question. And when you talk about being in the communities, our permits are specifically for crossing seashore lands. So if you're in Ocean Bay Park and you're talking about the Ocean Bay Park driving cut, if you've got essential service workers, your carters that remove your garbage, such as spoons or Sherveni, they have a permit to be driving, and their permit stipulates that they can drive before 9 and after 6 on Monday to Friday. So if it's those kind of a truck, they are perfectly good to go and drive on seashore property within the communities because they're removing your garbage. So those types of permits, those essential service, are good to drive all summer long. Again, to use Ocean Bay Park as an example, if it's a contractor vehicle, those rectangular stickers, because that Ocean Bay Park driving cut is not on seashore property specifically, if they go out that cut and drive between Ocean Bay Park and Seaview, there is no violation there because that's a community stretch. If they go east into Sailor's Haven and cross Sailor's Haven, then they are violating the terms of their permit. So it's a really hard question because I need to know where you are. I need to know what kind of permit we're talking about. But the short answer is yes, people can drive during the summer, but it is regulated as to who can and can't and when they can and can't.
All right, thank you. Sonia, the next question is for you. The Seashore says it understands the importance of maintaining community population to maintain infrastructure. Do you have any data to show what % of permit holders are active members of the local fire departments?
So that is also a good question. I am not required to maintain that information. I would assume that the local fire departments know who have permits to drive and who are residents there and volunteers, but I don't collect that, not at this point.
Okay, thank you. And this next question is also for you. Do the recreational permit holders drive through the checkpoint and all the way down to the recreation area on the east end? With 5,000 permit trips a year, that seems like a large percentage of cross-community traffic. Can you assess the number of permits allowed for this, especially since the recreational area is smaller?
So the recreational driving only occurs in the east end, and the entrance to that is adjacent to Smith Point County Park. There is no access from the west. We only allow from the Wilderness Visitor Center, and at one point it went all the way to Long Cove, which was 6 miles of driving. At this point with the breach, they can only go to Old Inlet, which is 1.5 miles, and it's 5,000 trips. Doesn't matter how many permits are given out, that's the maximum number of trips for the year. So no traffic should be coming or going from the west in order to access recreational driving.
Thanks for that clarification. Jason, this next one is for you. What's the policy when the ferry isn't running, when the bay is frozen and people have to get to their house?
Yeah, this one can be a difficult one to administer. It sort of depends on the community and the length of the suspension of the ferry service, but we do offer temporary permits. Usually, if the suspension is for an extended period of time, we'll cap it at the cost of a month, regardless of the time frame. But those permits are issued to folks who are on the waiting list, which means they've already applied for a permit, and we have some demonstration of their need to access a community. But we do issue temporary permits in those instances, but we have to vet them to make sure there's a bona fide need.
All right, thank you. Claire, another question for you. How are the ORV regulations enforced?
Multiple law enforcement officers that work on Fire Island, all of which are familiar with the permit system and the rules and regulations that go along with it. We will do everything from pull over a vehicle that we don't recognize and do a traffic stop and simply ask, hey, where's your permit? And then also when driving really gets going and there may be ice over permits or temporary permits, we'll set up a permit checkpoint and make sure that we can see the permit sticker on the person's vehicle. Or if they were given a temporary ice over style permit, we'll want to see the paper copy or an email, and we'll match the plate to the license plate on the vehicle to what's on the permit. And that's really how we do it. It's just a matter of traffic stops and permit checkpoints to make sure that things are all in line.
All right, thank you. Got another question for you. Why doesn't the Park Service monitor trips through the checkpoint during the winter to detect permit holders who aren't truly year-rounders and who don't pass through the checkpoint for extended periods of time?
So the computer and the driving program that we have that, you know, monitors everybody, we do just that. If we get a tip, if the park gets a tip that, you know, somebody isn't living here year round, we will run the driving history and, you know, kind of get an idea. It's not an end all be all answer. Some people, you know, they camp out, they do a huge shopping trip once or twice a month and they don't drive much. Other people, they're just gone. So it's not an end all be all. It's a tool that we use to kind of look and see if people are or aren't here. If someone's driving every week, a couple of times a week, that's usually a no-brainer. They live here. But once we start getting into more sporadic driving, that's when we might follow it up with you know, other questions or phone calls. And we always keep Sonia and Jason in the loop, but we have the ability to do just that, monitor people's driving.
Great, thank you for that. Doug, there's a question asking how many participants are on the webinar today?
It looks like we had about 90 some at one point. So around 90 we're on today from the public.
Great, thank you. Katie, this one's for you. What have studies of the wilderness area and the effects of driving shown since 2012?
We have some studies that we're planning to try to get at that question. So a lot of what we've seen has been anecdotal, although there are some results from other programs. So like our piping plover program, there's a lot that's happened with the recovery of the species on Fire Islands. We had our biggest successful year this year protecting that species, and they do like the wilderness area. They like the area east of the breach, and they like the area west of the breach. And that is not fully related to driving, because we don't let driving happen in that area when they're here. But we have seen that, so that kind of tells you about the quality of the habitat now. We want to do an acoustic monitoring survey, which because of COVID is now getting pushed back. But the idea is to put acoustic sensors in the wilderness west of the breach and east of the breach, and somewhere else on park property on the western side of the island to get an understanding of potential acoustic effects of driving. And we're not sure if we're going to find anything with that, but it's an interesting question that we've never looked at before. The use of the area has changed dramatically with the breach there. So we have the same amount of drivers with the recreational driving using, instead of 6 miles of beach, they're using 1.5 miles of beach, but the other 4.5 miles of beach are not being used at all. So the habitat is looking really good there. The dunes are growing back. The beach grass is extending more south in certain areas. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, Fire Island is so dynamic, it's hard to pinpoint one particular use having a direct effect on anything. But overall, we've seen a change in use, which seems to be benefiting the western side of the wilderness area.
Great. Claire, we have another question for you. If contractors are driving on the beach during the beach season in the middle of the day in the communities, who is supposed to enforce the rules?
So it depends what they're doing. If they're just driving and it's contractor driving season, then there's no violation. As I alluded to earlier, if they're driving around their community on the interior, you know, that's a community, that's a town thing. But I mean, it's kind of hard to answer this because I don't know when you're talking, are we talking contractor driving season or not? If it's contractor driving season and there's no violation, they're good to go because there's no time limits during the day when they can drive. So it depends where they are and the time of year, but it could be us.
I think they said this was on the beach during the summertime. It said beach season, so I'm assuming that's summertime in the middle of the day in the communities.
If that's the case, and sorry, I misunderstood, but if that's the case, then nobody should be driving unless they're given specific permission, which does happen occasionally. And then the other thing is, again, a lot of people confuse contractors with the essential service guys that deliver your propane, remove your household garbage, things like that. So it's up to us to enforce the rules, and it's up to Suffolk County as well.
All right, sounds good. And Sonia, we have one last question for you. How do I begin the process of applying for a year-round resident permit?
So I get asked that a lot. So just by definition, a year-round resident means those persons who are legally domiciled on the island and who in addition physically reside in their fixed and permanent homes on the island continuously, except for that dreaded brief and occasional absences for 12 months of the year. So if you are living on Fire Island year-round, 7 days a week, and I don't mean COVID living, it has to be your primary residence, okay? So you can't be on the mainland, 3 days a week and then come back 4 days a week and come and go, because that would be the definition of a seasonal resident or a part-time resident. So if you are actually in the house 7 days a week, all year round, then you could email me at Sonia_Tajani at nps.gov. I could spell that for you, or you could even call up their headquarters number and they'll give you my email address. And I will mail you an application. And with that, you will then have to return the application with your license, the licenses of the people on the application, your vehicle registration, your insurance ID card, and an application fee of $50, which you would pay at pay.gov. All the documentation you send me is some of the proof that shows that your primary residence is Fire Island. That is your only residence. So if you do that, you can email me, like I said, Sonia_Tajani, that's TAIANI at nps.gov, or you could call the headquarters number at 631-687-4750, and they will give you my email address, and then I will send the information out to you.
Hey, Sonia, do you mind writing your email, giving your email address to Anita and the NPS info one where people can contact for constant contact? And then Anita and the headquarters number, and then Anita can put that in the chat box to everyone?
Sure, I will do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, everybody. So that concludes our question and answer session. I did want to mention we held a webinar 2 weeks ago on September 2nd, and that version is up on Pepsi, so that if it sounded as though some people may have had issue with audio today, but that version is up on Pepsi, and this webinar, today's webinar, will be up on Pepsi in just a few days when it's ready to be posted. There's some processing we have to do, but we will be posting this webinar to Pepsi in the next few days. Probably if you check back early next week, it should be there. So thank you very much for all of your comments. Just wanted to remind you, if you have more ideas, we really especially appreciate when you post those to Pepsi so that we can review them and bring them into the process and consider them as the Seashore is considering what the next steps are and how best to shape this regulation to simplify it and better serve everyone. At this time, I want to hand it back to Katie to say a few final words. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending the webinar today and being engaged with your questions. They're really useful. This is, like I said, a legacy issue that has clearly not been easy to solve, and there's a lot of moving parts to it, but we're not going to get anywhere if we try to do this alone. So again, thank you for your participation, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue in the future.